Today, we're talking about an HOA that thought they could bully a self-reliant landowner by building a massive, illegal retaining wall to cut off his access to the world. They assumed he was isolated and helpless. What they didn't realize was that he had eyes everywhere, and he was about to tear their little kingdom down, brick by forged brick. Before we jump into today's unbelievable story of bureaucratic warfare and sweet revenge, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. This is a wild ride, so buckle up. My grandfather used to say that a man's worth isn't measured by the shine on his shoes, but by the calluses on his hands and the integrity of his fences. He told me that when I was 10, standing on the edge of the 20-acre spread in the Colorado foothills that had been in our family since the 1950s. "Land, Mark," he'd say, gesturing to the rolling hills dotted with ponderosa pines, "is the only thing they aren't making more of. Defend it." I took that lesson to heart. Now, at 45, I still live on that same property. I'm a retired heavy machinery mechanic. I don't just live here, I maintain it. The house is a sturdy, 2-story cabin I renovated myself, complete with a geothermal heating system I engineered over 2 long winters. I have a workshop out back that's better equipped than most commercial garages in Denver. I'm not entirely off the grid. I like my high-speed internet, but I'm close enough that when a blizzard knocks out power for the county, my lights are the only ones burning bright. For decades, my neighbors were coyotes, elk, and the occasional black bear wandering down from the national forest boundary. Life was quiet, predictable, and mine. That tranquility shattered about 3 years ago. A development corporation out of California bought the old ranch land adjacent to my southern boundary. They arrived with bulldozers, slick brochures, and the promise of upscale mountain living harmonized. What they meant was cookie-cutter mansions crammed onto half-acre lots, painted in various shades of beige and gray, governed by rules that dictated everything from the height of your grass to the breed of your dog. They called it Crestview Estates. I ignored them. They built their pretentious bait house and installed a perimeter fence, but their boundaries stopped right where mine began. I figured we'd maintain a polite, if chilly, distance. I was wrong. The first salvo arrived in a thick, creamy envelope with Crestview Estates Homeowners Association embossed in silver foil. Inside was a letter and a proposal. They were concerned about the aesthetic inconsistency of my access road. See, my driveway is a well-maintained gravel road, about a quarter-mile long, connecting my property to the county highway. Due to the geography of the area and the way the land grants were originally drawn up a century ago, the first 50 feet of my access road technically crossed a corner of the land Crestview now owned. It was a legally recognized deeded easement. It had been there longer than the HOA President had been alive. Their proposal? They wanted to upgrade my access road to match their community standards. This meant paving it, installing ornate street lamps, and adding a manicured hedge. The cost? They generously offered to split it with me, my share being a mere $75,000. I didn't even bother writing a response. I just tossed the envelope into the wood stove. 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived. This time the tone was less suggestive and more demanding. They cited vague bylaws about maintaining community integrity and threatened fines if I didn't comply with the upgrade plan. They also included a courtesy offer to purchase the easement from me, effectively landlocking my property for a laughable $20,000. I laughed out loud. They thought my access, my independence was worth less than a used Honda Civic. Then came the personal visit. I was resealing the deck when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel, slow, hesitant, like the driver was afraid of getting dust on their paintwork. I looked up to see a gleaming white Lexus SUV parked near my workshop. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd just come from a Botox appointment and a strategy meeting. She wore a sharp navy blue suit, sunglasses that covered half her face, and heels that sunk into the soft dirt. She held a leather-bound portfolio like a shield. "Mr. Harrison?" she asked, her voice tight and nasal. "That's me," I replied, not putting down my seal and brush. "I am Barbara Covington, president of the board for Crestview Estates. We've sent you several communications regarding the access road situation." "I read them," I said, flatly. She launched into a monologue that sounded like it was written by a lawyer and rehearsed in front of a mirror. She talked about property values, visual harmony, and the necessity of unified infrastructure. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic doublespeak. I waited until she had to take a breath. "Mr. Harrison, I understand your attachment to the rustic nature of your property, but progress is inevitable. Crestview Estates is a multi-million-dollar community. We cannot allow a dilapidated gravel path to detract from the experience of our residents."
Dilapidated? I gestured to the road. It was perfectly graded, dust-controlled, and bordered by wildflowers. This road is in better shape than the county highway. "We have a vision for this area," she continued, ignoring my comment, "and that vision does not include unauthorized, unsightly egress." "It's not unauthorized, it's my legal right of way." Something flickered behind her eyes, a flash of pure cold annoyance. "We shall see about that," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She placed her business card on the railing of my deck. "I suggest you reconsider our offer. It would be much easier for everyone if you cooperated." She turned, wobbled back to her Lexus, and drove away, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the faint smell of expensive perfume. I thought that was the end of it, a disagreement over landscaping. But over the next week, I started noticing things. Drones buzzing overhead, not the usual hobbyist kind, but professional surveying drones. Vans marked Crestview Security, parked just outside my property line, their occupants watching me through binoculars. Something was brewing. I could feel it in the air, like the metallic taste before a lightning storm. I didn't know it yet, but Barbara Covington wasn't just interested in paving my driveway. She was planning to erase it entirely, and she was about to learn the hard way what my grandfather meant when he said, "Defend your land." I woke up at 5:30 a.m. on a Tuesday to a sound that didn't belong in the mountains. It was the deep, guttural roar of heavy diesel engines and the unmistakable screech of metal tearing into rock. It wasn't distant. It was right on my doorstep. I pulled on my jeans and boots, grabbed my jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. The entrance to my access road, where it met the county highway, was a war zone. A massive excavator, painted bright yellow, was actively tearing up my gravel driveway. A bulldozer was shoving the debris, dirt, gravel, and the wildflowers I'd planted, into a waiting dump truck. There were at least a dozen men in hard hats and orange vests swarming the area. And there, standing off to the side, sipping from a travel mug as if she were supervising a garden party, was Barbara Covington. I sprinted down the hill, my blood pounding in my ears. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I roared as I approached the chaos. Barbara turned, her expression one of mild surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to be home. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she chirped over the din of the machinery. "As you can see, we've begun the infrastructure improvements." "Improvements? You're destroying my driveway." "We are addressing the unauthorized egress," she corrected smoothly, gesturing with her mug. "This corner of the property belongs to Crestview Estates. We've decided to utilize it differently." I looked past her, past the excavator, and saw what they were planning. They weren't just tearing up the road. They were digging down, deep into the hillside. Stacks of massive precast concrete blocks were staged nearby. "You're building a wall," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Barbara smiled, a thin, triumphant smirk. "A retaining wall, necessary for slope stabilization and aesthetic continuity. It will run the entire length of the southern boundary."
The southern boundary included the 50 feet where my easement ran. They were building a massive concrete barrier, easily 15 feet high, that would completely sever my property from the highway. I would be landlocked, trapped on my own mountain. This is illegal, I spat, my hands clenched into fists. I have a deeded easement. You can't block it. About that, Barbara said, pulling a sheaf of papers from her portfolio. We had our legal team review the original land grants. It seems the easement you rely on was improperly recorded back in the 1950s. A clerical error, apparently. According to our survey and the county records we've recently updated, your legal access is, well, it doesn't exist. She handed me the papers. They looked official. Stamps, seals, technical jargon. But I knew the land. I knew the history. This is garbage. You cooked these up. I assure you, Mr. Harrison, everything is perfectly legal and permitted. She tapped a laminated sheet posted on a temporary pole. It was a construction permit from the county. I'm calling the sheriff, I said, pulling out my phone. By all means, she said, completely unbothered. The dispatcher was polite but skeptical. I explained the situation, an HOA destroying my driveway, blocking my access with a wall. A deputy arrived about 40 minutes later. By then, the excavator had completely obliterated the entrance to my road and was digging a footing trench that looked deep enough to swallow a car. The deputy, a young guy named Officer Miller, listened to my story with a furrowed brow. He walked the perimeter, looked at the destruction. Then Barbara approached, all smiles and cooperation. Officer, thank you for coming, she said, handing her her stack of documents. We're undertaking some necessary stabilization work on our property. Mr. Harrison seems to be under the mistaken impression that he has an easement here.
Miller reviewed the documents. He looked at the construction permit. He looked at the survey maps Barbara provided. These look legit, Mr. Harrison, Miller said, rubbing the back of his neck. They have a permit from the county planning department, and this survey shows the boundary line right here. He pointed to a spot several feet inside where my driveway used to be. Those surveys are fake, I insisted. I have the original documents in my house. This easement has been recognized for 70 years. I understand your frustration, sir, Miller said, his tone shifting into that placating voice cops use when they think you're crazy. But we don't interpret deeds or survey maps. This is a civil matter, a property dispute. We can't stop permitted construction on private property. But they're blocking me in. How am I supposed to leave my home? Is there any other way out? No, not for a vehicle. It's dense forest and steep terrain in every other direction. Miller sighed. Look, I'll file a report, but my hands are tied. You need a lawyer and a certified surveyor to challenge this in court. He walked away, leaving me standing there, watching as the first row of concrete blocks was lowered into the trench by a crane. Barbara Covington didn't even look at me. She was already on her phone, probably bragging about her victory. That night, I sat on my porch in the dark. The silence of the mountains, broken by the clanging of metal and the roar of the construction lights they had brought in. They were working around the clock. In just 12 hours, they had erected a 10-foot-high, 50-foot-long segment of solid concrete. It was brutal, ugly, and terrifyingly efficient. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They were trying to bury me.
By the end of the week, the wall was complete. It was a monstrosity, 20 feet high, made of industrial-gray concrete, stretching across the entire southern boundary where my access used to be. It loomed over the landscape like a prison barrier. I was officially landlocked. The impact was immediate and devastating. The propane company called to say they couldn't make my scheduled delivery. Their truck couldn't reach my tank. My mail was returned to the post office marked "Access Obstructed." I had enough food and supplies to last a while. I always prepared for long winters, but the feeling of being caged in was suffocating. But the wall wasn't just an obstacle. It was a weapon. They had built it hastily, without proper engineering or environmental review, and they had built it right on the edge of the steep slope leading up to my house. 2 days after the wall was completed, we got the first heavy rain of the season. I walked down to the boundary line and saw the damage. The massive wall was interrupting the natural drainage of the hillside. Water was pooling behind it, saturating the soil on my side of the property line. The slope was starting to erode. Cracks were appearing in the dirt near the foundation of my workshop. They weren't just blocking me in, they were destabilizing my land. If this continued, I could be facing a landslide that would take out half my property. I called the county planning department, the one that had supposedly issued the permits. I explained the situation, the erosion, the danger. The clerk I spoke to sounded confused. A 20-foot retaining wall at Crestview Estates? We approved a permit for a 4-foot decorative fence and some minor regrading, not a major structural project. My blood ran cold. Are you sure? Yes, sir. I'm looking at the approved plans right now. What you're describing sounds like a massive code violation. I thanked her, hung up, and realized the depth of Barbara's deception. She hadn't just forged the survey maps. She had lied to the county about the scope of the project, or worse, she had someone on the inside helping her. I knew I needed proof. Not just of the wall, not just of the erosion, but of the intent. I needed to prove that this was a deliberate, malicious act designed to force me off my land. And that's when I decided it was time to play my trump card. You see, when you live in the mountains, you learn to be observant. And when you're a retired engineer with a penchant for technology, you take observation to the next level. Barbara thought I was just some mountain hermit tinkering with old engines and chopping wood. She didn't know I had spent the last decade building a state-of-the-art, off-grid surveillance system. It started as a way to monitor wildlife and protect against wildfires. But when Crestview Estates moved in, I upgraded it. I had high-definition, motion-activated cameras hidden inside hollowed-out fence posts. I had micro-recorders disguised as birdhouses, capturing ambient sound. I even had seismic sensors buried along the perimeter, originally intended to detect large animal movement, but sensitive enough to log the vibrations of heavy machinery. And then there was my drone, a custom-built quadcopter with a high-zoom lens and thermal imaging capabilities, capable of silent operation. Everything was solar-powered and synced wirelessly to a secure server hidden in a Faraday cage in my basement. Paranoid? Maybe. But paranoia is just another word for preparedness when your neighbors are sociopaths with bulldozers. I spent the next 3 days gathering the dirt. I flew the drone over the construction site, capturing detailed images of the wall, the lack of proper drainage, and the growing erosion on my side of the property line. I cross-referenced the GPS coordinates with my original survey maps, proving that the wall encroached onto my easement by several feet, regardless of Barbara's forged documents. But the real gold came from the hidden cameras and microphones. I reviewed the footage from the day the construction began. The first clip showed the construction foreman arguing with Barbara.
"This slope is unstable," he said, pointing to the hillside. "If we build a 20-foot wall here without proper footings and drainage, we could cause a landslide on the adjacent property." Barbara's response, captured in crystal-clear audio, made my jaw tighten. "Just build the damn wall. I'm not paying you to be a geologist. By the time the slope fails, Mr. Harrison will be long gone. He can't live up there without access. He'll cave and sell within a month." Intent. Clear, malicious intent. Another clip showed 2 workers moving the survey stakes in the middle of the night, shifting the boundary line several feet to make it look like the wall was entirely on Crestview property. They were laughing, joking about the mountain man who was about to get screwed. And then there was the footage from the hidden camera near the county highway. It captured a meeting between Barbara and a man in a suit who I recognized from the local news as a county commissioner known for his cozy relationships with developers. She handed him a thick envelope. He didn't open it, just slid it into his briefcase. "The permits?" she asked. "Approved," he replied with a wink. 4-foot decorative fence. Just make sure the check's clear. Bribery. Conspiracy. Fraud.
I compiled all the evidence, the videos, the audio recordings, the drone footage, the seismic data, the original survey maps, the emails from the county clerk confirming the discrepancy in the permits. I put it all on a ruggedized hard drive. I was ready. Barbara Covington wanted a war. She was about to get one.
I knew going back to the sheriff's department with this evidence was a necessary step, but I also knew it wouldn't be enough. Bureaucracy moves slowly, especially when powerful people like county commissioners are involved. I needed to apply pressure from another direction. I needed to take the fight public. First, I called a lawyer. I didn't pick some ambulance chaser from a billboard. I found the meanest, most experienced land use attorney in the state. His name was David Sterling. He had a reputation for tearing apart HOAs and developers who played fast and loose with the law. I called his office. His receptionist tried to schedule me for a consultation 3 weeks out. I don't have 3 weeks, I said. An HOA has built a 20-foot wall, landlocked my property, is causing a potential landslide, and I have video evidence of them bribing a county commissioner. There was a pause on the line. Hold, please. A moment later, a gruff voice came on the line. Mr. Harrison, David Sterling, talk to me. I gave him the 2-minute version of the story. He listened in silence. When I finished, he said, "Bring the evidence. Be at my office tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and don't talk to anyone else until then." I had to hike out of my property, scrambling down a steep, forested ravine for nearly a mile until I reached a side road where a friend could pick me up. It was difficult and dangerous, highlighting the reality of my situation. The next morning, I sat in Sterling's office. He was a man who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. We watched the footage together. When the clip of Barbara handing the envelope to the commissioner played, Sterling actually smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Mr. Harrison," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we are going to destroy them." He outlined the strategy. We would file an emergency injunction to stop any further work and demand the immediate removal of the wall. We would file a lawsuit against the HOA, Barbara Covington, personally, and the county commissioner for fraud, conspiracy, trespass, nuisance, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. "But lawsuits take time," I said. "I'm trapped up there. The erosion is getting worse." "That's where the injunction comes in," Sterling said. "And that's where you come in with the public pressure. We need to make this story so loud, so toxic, that the county has no choice but to act." I went back to my friend's house and got to work. I created a YouTube channel called Crestview Corruption. I edited the footage into a concise, devastating 15-minute video. I included the drone shots of the monstrous wall, the comparison of the original survey maps with the forged ones, the audio of Barbara admitting her intent to force me out, and the video of the bribery. I titled the video, "HOA Builds Illegal Wall to Trap Homeowner, Caught on Camera Bribing County Official." I uploaded it and shared the link on every local Facebook group I could find. Community watch pages, local news forums, even the Crestview residents page before they banned me 30 seconds later. The response was instantaneous and explosive. Within hours, the video had tens of thousands of views. The comments poured in. People were outraged. "Wait, I live in Crestview. Our HOA dues paid for this? That wall is hideous and illegal. That commissioner needs to be recalled immediately." By that evening, the local news stations were calling my friend's phone asking for interviews. I agreed to all of them. I stood in front of the camera, calm and resolute, and laid out the facts. I let the evidence speak for itself. The story aired that night. The headline, "Mountain Siege. Homeowner landlocked by HOA amidst allegations of bribery and fraud." The pressure was mounting, but I knew Barbara Covington wouldn't go down without a fight. Before we continue with the HOA's desperate retaliation, if you're enjoying this story of justice, take a second to hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to Keys in Chaos. These stories need to be heard, and your support helps us expose the corruption. Now, let's get back to the chaos. The thing about cornered animals is they don't surrender, they lash out. Barbara Covington was no different.
Once the story broke and the video went viral, I expected the HOA to retreat, to try and negotiate a settlement, maybe even apologize. Instead, they doubled down with a level of vindictiveness that was staggering. The first retaliation was legal. I received an email from the HOA's attorney, a slick, high-priced firm from Denver. It was a cease and desist letter, demanding I remove the defamatory and selectively edited video immediately or face a lawsuit for libel and slander. I forwarded it to David Sterling. He responded with a one-sentence email. "Ignore them. We're filing the injunction tomorrow." But the HOA wasn't just relying on legal threats. They started a smear campaign within the community. A notice was sent out to all Crestview Estates residents, posted on their private portal. A sympathetic resident leaked it to me. Community alert, ongoing dispute with non-compliant adjacent landowner. It went on to claim that I was an unstable, paranoid individual who had been harassing the HOA board for years. It claimed the wall was a necessary safety measure to protect the community from my erratic behavior and illegal activities on my property. They hinted at drug manufacturing, which was laughable. I barely drink coffee. They claimed the video was a fabrication, a deepfake designed to extort money from the HOA. Some residents bought it. People who had invested their life savings into these homes didn't want to believe they were living in a community run by criminals. But many others saw through the lies. The evidence in the video was too compelling. A rift started forming within Crestview Estates. Then came the physical escalation. I was back on my property, documenting the increasing erosion near the workshop. The cracks in the soil were wider now, some stretching several inches. I heard the sound of engines near the boundary line. I hiked down and found a crew of men in utility vests working near the base of the wall. They were digging near the junction box that housed the main power line running up to my property. "Hold it right there," I shouted, pulling out my phone and hitting record. "What are you doing?" The foreman looked up startled. "Authorized utility maintenance," he mumbled. "Authorized by who? This is my power line." The HOA requested an emergency shutoff. They claimed the erosion you caused is creating a hazard to the main grid. The erosion they caused with this illegal wall. "Look, buddy, we just follow the work orders. We have to cut the power." They were trying to freeze me out. It was late fall, and the temperatures were dropping below freezing at night. Without power, my geothermal system wouldn't run. I'd be without heat, light, and internet access, my only connection to the outside world. I immediately called the utility company. I explained the situation, the illegal wall, the ongoing legal dispute. I mentioned the viral video and the allegations of bribery. The supervisor I spoke to was hesitant, but when I mentioned I had David Sterling on retainer, the tone changed. "We will suspend the work order pending a review," the supervisor said. "If the HOA has misrepresented the situation, there will be consequences." The crew packed up and left, grumbling. I had dodged a bullet, but it was a stark reminder of how vulnerable I was. I uploaded the footage of the attempted power cut to the YouTube channel. HOA tries to cut off power to trapped homeowner. Desperation mounts. The video hit 100,000 views. The comment section exploded again. The local news ran a follow-up story. The pressure was becoming unbearable for the county. But Barbara had one last card to play, and it was the most dangerous one yet. The next few days were tense. The injunction hearing was scheduled for Friday. The county issued a stop work order on the wall, citing the discrepancy between the approved permit and the actual construction. It was a small victory, but the wall was already built. The damage was done. I knew Barbara was desperate. The investigation into the bribery allegations was gaining traction. The county commissioner was suddenly unavailable for comment. The HOA board was fracturing, with 2 members resigning and issuing public statements condemning Barbara's actions. She needed a distraction. She needed to shift the narrative. She needed me to look like the bad guy. On Wednesday night, around 2 a.m., I was woken by the seismic sensors alerting me to movement near the southern boundary. It wasn't the subtle vibration of an animal. It was the heavy thud of footsteps and the clang of metal. I checked the hidden cameras on my laptop. The night vision clicked on, revealing 4 figures moving near the base of the wall. They were wearing dark clothing and ski masks. They were carrying crowbars and what looked like canisters of gasoline. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was sabotage. I watched as they approached the area where the erosion was worst, near my workshop. They started digging into the saturated soil, deliberately undermining the slope. They were trying to trigger a landslide that would destroy my property and potentially make it look like a natural disaster, or worse, like I had caused it myself through negligence. And then I saw her, standing further back, partially obscured by the trees, watching the scene unfold. Barbara Covington. No ski mask, no crowbar, just a smug expression illuminated by the moonlight. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my jacket, my boots, and my high-powered spotlight. I didn't bring a weapon. I didn't need one. I had something much more powerful. The truth. I crept down the hill, staying in the shadows. I could hear the men grunting as they worked, the sound of dirt shifting. When I was about 20 feet away, I stepped out from behind a large pine tree and hit the spotlight. The sudden beam of intense white light blinded them. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and steady, though my hands were shaking with adrenaline. "Interesting time for some landscaping." The four men froze. They dropped their tools and shielded their eyes. "This is private property. What you are doing is criminal trespass, vandalism, and potentially attempted arson, judging by those gas cans." One of the men took a step toward me, menacingly. "Shut that light off, old man." "I wouldn't do that," I said, raising my phone and hitting record. "You see, you're currently being filmed by 4 hidden cameras and a thermal imaging drone hovering directly overhead. Your faces, your actions, everything is being live-streamed to my lawyer and the sheriff's department." I was bluffing about the live stream, but they didn't know that. They looked at each other, uncertain. Then one of them bolted, scrambling back toward the wall and disappearing into the darkness. The others followed suit. But I wasn't focused on them. I turned a spotlight toward the trees where I had seen Barbara. She was still there, frozen like a deer in the headlights. "Barbara Covington," I said, loud enough for the microphone on my phone to pick up clearly. "Conspiring to commit felony vandalism and sabotage. You really thought you could get away with this?" Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You will regret this, Harrison. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "No, Barbara," I said, taking a step closer. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. It's over." She turned and ran, stumbling in her expensive shoes, disappearing into the night. I stayed there until the sheriff's deputies arrived. This time, it wasn't the young Officer Miller. It was the sheriff himself, a grizzled veteran named Sheriff Brody. He had seen the footage I had sent earlier that day, the compilation of the bribery and the fraud. He walked the scene with me, examining the abandoned tools, the gas cans, the fresh digging that had further undermined the slope. "She's lost her mind," Brody murmured, shaking his head. I showed him the footage of the nighttime sabotage, the masked men, Barbara watching from the shadows. "We'll have a warrant for her arrest by morning, and those goons she hired. We'll identify them from the drone footage." I finally felt like I could breathe. The siege was broken.
The courtroom was packed. News reporters, Crestview residents, curious onlookers. The story of the mountain siege had captured the public imagination. I sat at the plaintiff's table with David Sterling. He looked calm, confident, ready for battle. Across the room, Barbara Covington sat with her high-priced legal team. She looked pale, stressed, her usual smugness replaced by a brittle defiance. She had been arrested the previous morning, charged with felony vandalism, conspiracy, and trespassing. She was out on bail, but her reputation was in ruins. The hearing was for the emergency injunction, but everyone knew it was much more than that. It was a referendum on the HOA's corruption and abuse of power. Judge Thompson, A no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime presided. Barbara's lawyers started first. They tried to paint a picture of a misunderstanding, a legitimate property dispute that had escalated due to my aggressive and defamatory behavior. They claimed the wall was necessary for safety, that the permits were valid, and that the video evidence was unreliable. Then David Sterling stood up. He didn't just argue the case, he conducted a demolition. He laid out the timeline of events, meticulously documented with emails, letters, and time-stamped photos. He presented the original survey maps, certified by an independent surveyor, proving the easement was valid and the wall was encroaching on my property. He presented the emails from the county clerk, confirming that the permit approved was for a 4-foot fence, not a 20-foot retaining wall. He presented the forensic analysis of the permits Barbara had shown to the police. They were forgeries, cobbled together from other documents. Then came the videos. He played the clip of Barbara admitting her intent to force me out by building the wall and causing the slope to fail. The courtroom gasped. He played the clip of the workers moving the survey stakes in the middle of the night. He played the clip of the nighttime sabotage, the masked men, Barbara watching from the shadows. And then the pièce de résistance, the bribery. Sterling played the video of Barbara handing the envelope to the county commissioner. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice booming through the courtroom, "this is not a property dispute. This is a coordinated criminal conspiracy designed to steal Mr. Harrison's land, defraud the county, and endanger his life. Crestview Estates, under the leadership of Barbara Covington, has acted with malice, arrogance, and a complete disregard for the law." Barbara's lawyers objected, but the judge overruled them. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Thompson didn't even recess to deliberate. He delivered his ruling from the bench. "I have never seen such a blatant and egregious abuse of power by a homeowners association," Judge Thompson said, his voice tight with anger. "The actions of Crestview Estates and Barbara Covington are reprehensible." He granted the emergency injunction. He ordered the HOA to immediately remove the retaining wall and restore the access road to its original condition at their expense within 14 days. He ordered them to pay for the stabilization of the slope and any repairs to my property caused by the erosion. He also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into the bribery, fraud, and conspiracy allegations. The courtroom erupted. I sat there, stunned, the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting off my shoulders. Sterling clapped me on the back. "Justice," he whispered.
The fallout was swift and devastating for Crestview Estates. The day after the hearing, the remaining HOA board members resigned en masse. The county appointed a trustee to take over the management of the community. The HOA's accounts were frozen. The news of the verdict spread like wildfire. The video went mega viral, hitting millions of views. I was inundated with interview requests from national news outlets. I became a reluctant hero for homeowners everywhere who had been bullied by tyrannical HOAs. Barbara Covington was indicted on multiple felony charges, including bribery, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. She eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. She lost everything: her home, her reputation, her freedom. The county commissioner was also arrested and charged with accepting bribes and abuse of office. He was recalled by the voters and faced his own trial. The construction company that built the wall was fined heavily by the county for violating the stop work order and building without a proper permit. They later sued the HOA to recover their costs, further depleting the community's funds. Crestview Estates became a cautionary tale. Property values plummeted. Residents were furious that their dues had been used to fund a criminal enterprise. The community was fractured. The upscale mountain living dream shattered. 2 weeks after the hearing, a demolition crew arrived at my property. This time, they were working under the supervision of the county and my lawyer. They dismantled the concrete monstrosity brick by brick. I stood on my porch, watching as the wall came down, the sunlight finally hitting the southern side of my property again. The sense of relief was overwhelming. The crew repaired the slope, installing proper drainage and stabilization measures. They rebuilt my access road, grading the gravel perfectly, just the way I liked it. The lawsuit against the HOA resulted in a massive settlement. The insurance company paid out for the damages, the legal fees, and the emotional distress. It was enough money to ensure I would never have to worry about finances again. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was about defending my land, my home, my independence. A few months later, I installed a new gate at the entrance to my driveway, a sturdy steel gate with a keypad entry, and next to it, I placed a small, discreet sign. Private property. Trespassers will be videotaped, prosecuted, and possibly made famous. I looked out over my land, the ponderosa pines rustling in the breeze, the mountains stretching out before me, wide, peaceful, and mine. My grandfather would have been proud. This story is a reminder that no matter how powerful or entitled they seem, HOAs and Karens are not above the law. When you stand your ground, armed with the truth and the evidence, you can tear down the walls they tried to build around you. Thank you for watching Keys and Chaos. If you have your own HOA nightmare story, share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and revenge. We'll see you next time.